Hello, my name is Daniel Warfield. I am Director of Engineering Engagement at EyeLevel, and today I have the pleasure of showing you GroundX On-Prem. So GroundX is EyeLevel's feature-complete retrieval engine. It basically allows you to ingest super complicated human documents, PDFs, PowerPoints, all sorts of crazy formatted visual stuff, and GroundX will ingest that information, break it into LLM-ready data that can be understood by a language model, that can then be stored and then queried against to do things like RAG or other AI-powered applications. Super cool. GroundX On-Prem we have a few versions of GroundX On-Prem. What I'm going to be showing you today will be our free and open source version of GroundX On-Prem. So for free, and you can look through the code, you can deploy GroundX or a version of GroundX on your cloud or in your GCP or whatever. And that's super useful because if you're working in a regulated industry and you can't send data to us, you can bring GroundX to you, which is really cool. You might be able to imagine there are a ton of ways to install GroundX on-prem because there are a ton of prems that it could be installed upon. Today we're going to be assuming that you're installing on AWS and you're doing it basically from scratch. So you don't have Kubernetes set up, you don't have any infrastructure really, and you want to deploy GroundX on-prem within some availability zone within your AWS account. So the first step is to go to EyeLevel AI GroundX On-Prem, the GitHub repo. And then if we scroll down, there are a few ways to install it, but we're going to be doing the most simple approach. And also, by the way, we're going to be doing this in a basically from scratch Ubuntu emulation. You can do this on Mac. You can do this on obviously Linux. You can do it probably on Windows as well. We're just going to be using these tools, so Terraform, AWS CLI, and then kubectl. This will probably work in the Linux subsystem within Windows, which is relatively new. But we're going to be installing this basically from scratch. And then what we'll finish with is the ability to use GroundX On-Prem within a Colab notebook in Python, and then we will be doing RAG with GroundX On-Prem and with a local LLM, and thus we will be doing RAG without interfacing with any external system, like without interfacing with OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, which is kind of the whole point of GroundX On-Prem. So first, we need to install Terraform, AWS CLI, and kubectl. To set up Terraform, you can follow these docs. This is the official Terraform documentation for installing Terraform, and you can see there are a variety of environments that you can install it upon. We're going to be using Linux. I'm using Ubuntu currently. So I believe all these are installed by default. So I can go ahead and copy this and then paste it. I can copy this and then paste it. I don't believe I need to copy this. This is just, we can. It'll be fun. Copy this and then paste it. It looks similar. We can copy this and then paste it. We can copy this and then paste it. We can copy this and then paste it. And thus, we're now super fancy engineers that have installed Terraform. Terraform is installed. We need to install the AWS CLI, which is pretty straightforward. If we come over to here in the repo, and then we scroll down, I'm in Linux, and I'm running an emulation on Mac, which is a ARM style of processor. And then I can copy this, which will download, unzip, and then install the AWS CLI, paste it, run it. And I can press A to allow all. And now AWS is installed. Now that the AWS CLI is installed, we're going to need an API key so that we can talk to our AWS environment, our AWS account. So go ahead and log into the AWS console and then navigate to IAM, and then user, and I'm going to navigate to me, my user. And if you go over to security credentials, you can see access keys. You're going to need to create an access key that has a command line. Now you'll notice a recommendation to use Cloud Shell, which is a fantastic tool, which you can't use for this because it only has a storage limit of 1 GB, which after installing Terraform and some other things gets eaten up in this process. So you unfortunately can't use Cloud Shell, so you'll need to set up the access key for the CLI and then configure it in your, I guess for us now, Linux environment. Your AWS environment, you're going to type AWS configure, and this will allow you to type in your access key ID, your secret access key, some default region. I recommend not even changing the default output format. And then once you've entered all those in correctly, you will be able to proceed with the next steps. Before we proceed, I think it might be a good idea to check if we're installed correctly. So we can do AWS EKS. Let's see. What is it? Well, here. I don't have to look fancy. I can just copy this. So this is a command that will allow us to search for all of the EKS instances, which we're going to be using in our AWS account. And in US East 2, we currently don't have any, which is fine, but really we want to just make sure this works, right? So we're all hooked up. Now we can kind of proceed. So now we can come back to setting up kubectl, which will allow us to do certain commands and management stuff for Kubernetes. So we want to install on Linux, and this is an ARM, and we're going to copy this. Going to run this. And we are going to do these things because it seems like a good thing to do. So we're going to verify the install. And we're going to run this, which I guess gives us a slightly cleaner output. Okay, cool. The install was good. And then we are going to actually install kubectl. And then we're going to test by making sure that we have a kubectl client. And we do. Fantastic. So now we're ready to go. We're all set up. We have Terraform, we have the AWS CLI, and we have kubectl. Now we can actually deploy GroundX On-Prem. We are going to be deploying compute resources onto AWS, which means that they will incur cost once they're deployed. I recommend that you have some AWS experience before doing this. And if not, you have someone around who does have some AWS experience, and that you keep an eye on your costs so that you're not surprised by all these resources that are getting spooled up. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and clone the repo. And then I'm going to cd into it. Fantastic. And I'm going to run this command right here. Now what that command does is there is a configuration file called env.tfvars.example. That is an example of what env.tfvars should be, or something similar to what tfvars should be. You can kind of look through the documentation for this and see what those configuration files mean and what you might want to change. But for now, we're going to be using the default. And then once that's set up, we can run environment AWS setup EKS. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, paste. And we have copied tfvars. So I'm going to press yes. And we want to install in US East 2. And all of that looks good. I'll go ahead and press yes. And it will do its thing. This is going to set up EKS. This is going to set up security groups. This is going to set up load balancers, API gateways, all that stuff, so that we can deploy and use GroundX On-Prem, have resources that can host GroundX On-Prem. So we'll come back once this is done. So what we just did was we just deployed all of the infrastructure that is required for hosting GroundX on our AWS, specifically the availability zone US East 2. So if we go ahead and go to the dashboard and we go to EKS, for instance, which is AWS's flavor of Kubernetes, we now have a new cluster. We can click that, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. We have compute, we have node groups. There's a ton of optimization. We filmed an entire video about kind of what's going on under the hood in GroundX and kind of how it ticks. So now that we have all of this infrastructure set up, we can deploy GroundX onto this infrastructure. So if I go back to the repo, I can run another copy command, which is copying the operator. So this is a Helm operator that is deploying GroundX onto our environment. Now, this one you can't simply just copy, or you really, really shouldn't. What you should do is you should run this command, bin/uuid, and that will give you some randomly generated UUIDs. It'll be different every time. So you should use these UUIDs to modify env.tfvars in the operator. So if we do nano operator env.tfvars, there is a API key and username. You should change these. You should really change all of these for your particular instance. And the reason for this is because this version of AWS On-Prem, the way we're deploying it, it will be publicly facing. So you need an API key to access it. So it's super important that you modify this so that only you can access it. I'm not going to. I'm going to use the default API key and username, but you really, really shouldn't. You should change those. I am going to run operator setup. Yes, have I copied it? No, I have not configured the settings, but I'll say I will. Again, you really, really should do that. And now it is using a Helm operator to deploy Kubernetes or GroundX onto our infrastructure that we just created. It's been set up. Now we can go ahead and use kubectl to find our external endpoint. So it'll be labeled external IP, but it's really a URL associated with that IP. So if we go ahead and copy this command here, and then we run it, you will be able to see an external IP. And this will be the endpoint that we will hook up our GroundX client to. Fantastic. So now we can tie this up in a neat little bow. This isn't a tutorial on how to use GroundX. We have a ton of documentation and other videos on how to use GroundX, but I wanted to kind of complete and wrap this up. So we're going to install the GroundX SDK in Python, and then we're going to configure GroundX to point to our GroundX On-Prem instance. So here we specified the external IP, which is exactly how it was defined when we ran that previous function. We're going to use that external IP, and then we're going to do a little bit of configuring. It has to point to the API endpoint, and it has to be HTTP. You could also configure it to be HTTPS if you wanted. And then also during our configuration, as you might recall, you really, really, really were supposed to set up an API key. Here's where you would put it in, and you'd probably want to use some sort of secret management system to do that effectively. Google Colab has the Google Colab Secrets Manager. So again, this isn't a GroundX tutorial, but just to wrap this up, what I did here is I created a new bucket called Demo Bucket. That's where documents get stored. And then what I'm doing is I'm uploading a document called document.pdf to that bucket. And that document is a fairly complex document with all sorts of crazy formatting. It has tables it has some tables. It has wonky figures. It has all sorts of stuff. And this document was actually featured in the Ragmasters video of GroundX On-Prem when we released it previously. So I'm uploading that document to GroundX. And then what GroundX is going to do is it's going to look at that document, it's going to understand that document, and it's going to break it up into LLM-ready data such that we can do RAG with that document. So when you upload, you'll get a process ID, and that will queue the process. What you can do is you can then poll that process to wait for it to be completed. And then once your upload is complete, you can go ahead and do RAG with that document or whatever documents you've uploaded. So the way you do that is you do GroundX search content, you point it towards the bucket and you give it some query. For instance, what testing protocol should I follow if the package is shipping LTL? You pass that to GroundX to search, and then you'll get back some context once you unpack the response. And that context is a bunch of information from a variety of sources that are relevant to that question. And this is what we call the search text. This is essentially an amalgamation of all of the sections of the document that are relevant to that question put together so that you can feed it to an LLM for completion. So then what I'm doing in this particular notebook is I am connecting to Hugging Face and I'm downloading Llama 3.2 3B Instruct, which is a fairly small LLM. It's actually kind of big. You need an A100 to run it properly, but relative to really large language models, it's a relatively small one. Then what I'm doing is I'm setting up a message. I'm saying, hey, use this information to answer the question. And I'm using the context that we got previously from GroundX. And then what I'm saying is, this is the question. And then I'm doing a little bit of prompt engineering. Think about your answer and generate a response. And the question was, if I go up here, the question was, what testing protocol should I follow if the package is shipping LTL? And then the response was, based on the provided text excerpt, if the package is shipping LTL less than truckload, the testing protocol to follow is the ISTA 3B protocol. So if we go here, does the item ship LTL? Yes, follow the ISTA 3B protocol. So it worked. We did RAG on this document using our own hosted version of GroundX On-Prem. And we also used a language model locally on our Google Colab. And then as a result, we've done the entire RAG pipeline removed from any external APIs, which would, with some modification, this would be able to be injected in virtually any security conscious environment. So thank you so much for joining me, and feel free to check out RAGmasters and some of our other documentation to learn more about GroundX and how it works. Don't go, I forgot. So we built that stuff, but now we have these computers that are running. And if you just wanted to experiment with GroundX On-Prem and you're not actually planning on using it for an extended period of time, or if you have used it for an extended period of time and are now done, we now want to tear it down. Right, so we don't want all these resources just sitting and giving us a bill on AWS. So you can run these guys in order from top to bottom, manually, preferably with a pause in between to do that. A brief pause. You don't have to wait a day, but we've noticed that there can be some race conditions when doing this, which is why we didn't just wrap this up into a single bash script or something. So what you do is you just copy this, and then you paste it in here, and then you run it. And then it doesn't take a very long time. Then you do, step by step, and then that will tear down all of the things we've created. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you maybe in RAGmasters. Feel free to leave comments and questions. And yeah. While we're here, while we're all friends. So GroundX On-Prem is a free and open source, service that you can use. You can deploy GroundX On-Prem yourself. But there's actually other flavors of GroundX On-Prem. We have white glove support. So if you are interested in doing this, but you don't really feel like you have the technical know-how to configure it within your system, we can help with that. And also, if the performance isn't quite as good as you would like, GroundX On-Prem, the free and open source one, it's pretty solid, but we have some much more advanced models that we've been working on for a while that will do the same thing but better. So if you want to work with us, let me run this next guy. If you want to work with us to get GroundX On-Prem working within your system, configured, and with our most up-to-date models, with our support, we do offer that as a service. So anyway, thank you so much. My name's Daniel Warfield. I'm Director of Engineering Engagement at EyeLevel, and it has been an absolute pleasure.